On the morning of January 15, 1947, a young woman named Betty Berzinger was walking through a quiet residential neighborhood in Leimert Park, Los Angeles. She was heading to a shoe repair shop. Her 3-year-old daughter walked beside her. As they passed a vacant lot on South Norton Avenue, Betty glanced toward the grass. She saw something. At first, she thought it was a broken department store mannequin. The pale skin. The strange stillness. The unnatural position. She took a few steps closer. It was not a mannequin. It was a young woman. 22 years old. Dark hair. She had been carefully placed on her back in the dirt, arms raised slightly above her head, legs straight. Her body had been severed completely at the waist. Both halves had been washed clean. There was not a single drop of blood on the ground or on the body. Whoever had left her there had taken extraordinary care in how she was positioned. Betty Berzinger grabbed her daughter and ran. Within hours, the Los Angeles Police Department had descended on the scene. Within days, the story had spread across the country. Within weeks, the name they gave her, the Black Dahlia, had become one of the most recognizable phrases in American criminal history. The case was never solved. 77 years later, no one has ever been charged with the murder of Elizabeth Short. This is her story. And the story of the investigation that failed her. Elizabeth Ann Short was born on July 29, 1924, in Hyde Park, a neighborhood in Boston, Massachusetts. She was the third of 5 daughters born to Cleo and Phoebe Short. Her early childhood was marked by absence. When Elizabeth was 6 years old, her father abandoned the family. He left his car near a bridge in Medford, Massachusetts, a detail designed to make it appear that he had jumped to his death. He had not. He had simply walked away. He moved to California and started a new life, leaving his wife and 5 daughters with nothing. Phoebe Short raised her daughters alone through the Great Depression. Elizabeth was a sickly child. She suffered from severe bronchitis and respiratory problems that kept her out of school frequently. Florida's warmer climate was recommended for her health, and she began spending winters there as a teenager, staying with family friends. She was, by every account, beautiful. Dark hair. Pale skin. Large dark eyes. She carried herself with a quiet elegance that made people notice her. She wanted to be an actress. It was the 1940s. She was young and beautiful and living in an era when Hollywood felt like a place where dreams could be made real if you were willing to travel far enough and want it badly enough. In 1943, something unexpected happened. Elizabeth tracked down her father in California. Cleo Short had reinvented himself in Vallejo. Father and daughter reunited, and for a time, Elizabeth lived with him. It did not last. The two argued. Cleo threw her out. Elizabeth was 19 years old, alone in California, with no money and no plan. She did what many young women in her situation did. She drifted. She moved between cities, Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, San Diego. She waited tables. She worked at a military base canteen during the war. She dated soldiers. She charmed people easily and was known for her warmth and her ability to make friends. But she never found stability. She never found the acting career she had come to California to pursue. In the fall of 1946, she was back in Los Angeles. She was 22 years old. She had been in the city before. She knew people there. She moved in circles that overlapped with the entertainment industry, nightclubs, small hotels, people who knew people. On January 9, 1947, Elizabeth Short was seen for the last time at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She was waiting in the lobby. She was never seen alive again. 6 days passed between the last confirmed sighting of Elizabeth Short and the discovery of her body. 6 days during which no one reported her missing. No one filed a police report. No one raised an alarm. This tells you something about the life she was living, a life of transience, of staying with different people in different places, of existing on the edges of a city that was too large and too busy to notice one young woman's absence. On the morning of January 15, Betty Berzinger's call brought the LAPD to South Norton Avenue in Leimert Park. What the officers found was unlike anything most of them had encountered before. The body had been placed, not dumped, placed, with deliberate care. The two halves were positioned several inches apart. The skin had been cleaned. The hair had been washed. There were marks on the wrists and ankles from rope or cord, indicating she had been bound during her captivity. Most disturbing, the corners of her mouth had been cut, sliced open from the edges toward her ears. A deliberate mutilation. A wound that would have required time. That would have required the killer to be alone with her, undisturbed, for an extended period. There was a small tattoo on her thigh. A section of skin had been removed from the same area, cut away cleanly, with apparent precision. The cause of death was determined to be hemorrhage and shock caused by concussion and lacerations to the face. She had been beaten severely. She had suffered. The medical examiner concluded that she had been killed elsewhere and transported to the vacant lot sometime between midnight and dawn. The absence of blood at the scene confirmed this. She had been moved after death. Whoever had done this had taken their time. Had cleaned the body. Had staged the scene. This was not an impulsive act. It was deliberate. Methodical. Controlled. And whoever had done it had walked away without leaving a single piece of identifiable evidence. The LAPD investigation into the death of Elizabeth Short became, almost immediately, one of the largest in California history. Her fingerprints were sent to the FBI in Washington. They matched a file. Elizabeth had been fingerprinted years earlier when she worked at the military base canteen. Within hours, they had a name to go with the body. Reporters were given unprecedented access to the crime scene and to the investigation. This was not unusual for the era. The relationship between the LAPD and the Los Angeles press was famously close, sometimes to the point of compromise. Newspapers competed ferociously to break new details. It was a reporter at the Los Angeles Examiner who called Phoebe Short, Elizabeth's mother, and told her that her daughter had won a beauty contest, leading her on before revealing the truth. The cruelty of that call was reported widely and added to the sensation surrounding the case. The nickname came from the press. The origin is disputed. Some accounts say it was inspired by the 1946 film The Blue Dahlia, combined with Elizabeth's preference for dark clothing and black-laced lingerie. Others say local drugstore employees had taken to calling her the Black Dahlia when she was alive, based on her appearance. Whatever the origin, the name stuck immediately and completely. The investigation generated an almost unmanageable volume of material. Within days, the LAPD had received thousands of tips. Within weeks, that number had grown into the tens of thousands. Detectives worked around the clock. They traced Elizabeth's movements in her final weeks. They interviewed everyone she had known, men she had dated, women she had stayed with, acquaintances from the nightclub circuit, people she had met briefly and in passing. A picture emerged of a young woman who had been living a precarious life, dependent on the generosity of people she barely knew, moving from address to address, always in search of something that kept slipping away. But the picture of her final days, the 6 days between the Biltmore and the vacant lot, remained stubbornly unclear. Where had she been? Who had she been with? No one who came forward could account for all of it. What happened next was one of the strangest phenomena in American criminal history. People began confessing to the murder. Not one or two. Not a handful. More than 50 people walked into police stations, wrote letters, or called investigators to confess to killing Elizabeth Short. Every single one of them was cleared. Some were attention seekers. Some were mentally ill. Some were in obvious distress and looking for help in the most extreme way they could imagine. A few seemed to have genuine knowledge of details that, upon investigation, turned out to have been published in newspapers. The volume of false confessions was so large that it became its own obstacle to the investigation. Detectives who should have been following real leads spent weeks and months processing and eliminating confessors. And while they did, whoever had actually killed Elizabeth Short had more time to disappear. The false confessions also polluted the public narrative. Every new confessor generated newspaper coverage. Every headline kept the case alive in the public imagination while simultaneously making it harder to separate signal from noise. The investigation expanded. Over 150 people were formally investigated as suspects. Hundreds more were interviewed. The LAPD received tips from across the country and from overseas. None of them led anywhere conclusive. The case went cold. Decades after the murder, serious investigators have focused on several primary suspects. None have been proven guilty. Each represents a different theory of who Elizabeth Short encountered in the last days of her life. The most prominent suspect is a man named George Hodel. Hodel was a prominent Los Angeles physician in the 1940s, well-connected, highly educated, known in the city's social circles. He was also, by many accounts, a deeply disturbing human being. He was investigated by the LAPD in 1950 for a separate crime. He eventually left the United States. George Hodel died in 1999. His son, Steve Hodel, is a former LAPD detective. After his father's death, Steve found a photograph among his father's belongings, a photograph of a dark-haired young woman. Steve believed it was Elizabeth Short. He spent years investigating his own father, ultimately publishing a book called Black Dahlia Avenger in 2003. His conclusion: George Hodel killed Elizabeth Short. Steve Hodel's case is extensive and circumstantial. It points to George Hodel's medical background. The precise bisection of Elizabeth's body required anatomical knowledge and surgical skill. It points to his proximity to the crime. It points to a recording secretly made by the LAPD in which George Hodel appears to make a reference to a killing. The LAPD has never formally endorsed this theory. A second suspect is a surgeon named Walter Bailey. Bailey lived less than 2 blocks from where Elizabeth's body was found. He had the medical training necessary to perform the precise mutilations on the body. He was going through a difficult divorce at the time of the murder. His daughter was acquainted with Elizabeth Short's sister. Bailey died of a brain disorder in 1948, 1 year after the murder. A third figure of interest is Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner and film industry figure who had provided Elizabeth with a place to stay. She had rejected his romantic advances. His address book was found among her belongings. Investigators considered him a suspect but never built a case against him. There are others. There have always been others. Every decade brings a new book, a new theory, a new suspect. None of them have provided the final answer. Why was the case never solved? The honest answer is, several reasons, none of them acceptable. The first is contamination. The crime scene was compromised almost immediately. Reporters and photographers were at the scene before the area was properly secured. Evidence that might have existed was walked over, disturbed, and destroyed. The second is institutional failure. The LAPD in the 1940s was not the organization it would later become. Corruption was widespread. Cases were handled inconsistently. Records were lost or destroyed. Witnesses were interviewed once and never followed up with. The third is time. In the first hours and days after a murder, leads are warm and witnesses remember things clearly. The Elizabeth Short investigation became so large, so chaotic, and so media-saturated so quickly that the normal rhythm of a homicide investigation never took hold. The fourth is the nature of Elizabeth's life. She moved often. She knew many people casually and few people well. The person she was with in the days before her death may have been someone almost no one else knew she had encountered. Finding that person required exactly the kind of disciplined, systematic work that the investigation was not able to sustain. And the fifth, perhaps the most troubling, is that the killer may simply have been very good. The body showed no impulsive violence. No loss of control. The murder was planned. The cleanup was thorough. The staging was deliberate. The choice of a vacant lot in a residential neighborhood, positioned to be found in daylight, suggests someone who understood how crime scenes work. This was not someone who panicked. This was someone who thought. Elizabeth Short was not a celebrity when she died. She was a young woman from Boston who had come to California with a dream and found only difficulty. She had no money. No stable home. No career. What she had was beauty, warmth, and a deep need for connection, qualities that made her easy to approach, easy to manipulate, and easy to forget. The press made her famous after her death in a way she never was in life. They named her. They mythologized her. They turned her murder into entertainment. And in doing so, they also obscured her. The Black Dahlia became more famous than Elizabeth Short. The case became more discussed than the person. The mystery became more compelling than the human being at the center of it. Her family waited for answers that never came. Her mother, Phoebe Short, lived until 1978, 31 years after her daughter's murder. She never received an answer. She never saw anyone charged. She died not knowing. 5 sisters grew up in the shadow of this case. Some of them gave interviews over the decades. All of them asked the same thing. Who did this? And why has no one been held responsible? Those questions are still unanswered. On a quiet street in Leimert Park, Los Angeles, there is a stretch of pavement on South Norton Avenue. The vacant lot is long gone. There are homes there now. People live their lives without knowing what happened on that ground 77 years ago. Elizabeth Short was 22 years old. She had come to California the way thousands of young people come to California every year, believing that something better was waiting for them there. That the city would recognize something in them that the places they came from had missed. She never got to find out if she was right. What we know is this: in the early hours of January 15, 1947, someone drove to that vacant lot and placed her body in the grass with cold, unhurried deliberateness. Someone who had spent days with her. Someone who knew what they were doing. Someone who walked away without leaving a trace. Over 150 suspects. More than 50 false confessions. Thousands of leads. Millions of newspaper words. And no answer. The Black Dahlia case is not just a mystery. It is a failure, of an investigation, of an institution, and of a city that let a young woman's murder become a story rather than a crime to be solved. Elizabeth Short deserved better. She still does.